Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be starting in about 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to allow everyone to populate the webinar. So please be patient. We will start in exactly 1 to 2 minutes. Well, it's almost 7:02, and I think we should get started. Good evening. On behalf of the Jewish Family Service, I want to welcome you to our second webinar, this webinar called Navigating in a Pandemic Without a Map. I'm Dr. Don Shifrin, a pediatrician and also a JFS board member, and I will be moderating the webinar tonight. After 8 weeks into the Stay in Place proclamation, teens are enduring life-changing disruptions to their present lives and uncertainty about what a new normal will mean to any future plans. In helping families better understand the stresses of their separation from their peers, the chafing at the loss of their independence, and the resulting often raw and unfiltered emotional responses, we're fortunate tonight to have two dedicated and knowledgeable pediatricians to provide us with their insights and guidance. A few working comments before we get started. If you all will check your chat box down at the bottom of your Zoom webinar video, you will see some housekeeping items. And this regards asking questions or putting in comments about the webinar as it gets started and continues. We'll do our best in the next 45 or 50 minutes to address as many of your concerns as possible, and be advised the webinar will be recorded as well. And now I want to begin by thanking and introducing our two panelists. Dr. Lelach Rave is a primary care pediatrician with the Everett Clinic and was previously a hospital-based physician at UCLA and Seattle Children's. She is currently a co-chair of our Washington State chapter's American Academy of Pediatrics Legislative Committee that advocates for child health issues with our state legislators in Olympia. And she is quarantining, forgive the pun, at home with her 16, 13, and 9-year-old children, 2 dogs, and her husband, Will, who happens to be CEO of Jewish Family Service. Our next panelist is Dr. Cora Breuner. Cora Breuner is a University of Washington professor of pediatrics and adolescent medicine at Seattle Children's, and she directs the eating disorder and biofeedback clinics at Seattle Children's. She is the former chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics National Committee on Adolescence and a sought-after expert on adolescent and integrative issues. She has three adult children, 1 dog, and is also a certified Zumba instructor. And I think that we're still waiting for Elizabeth McDougall. Oh, there she is. Thank you, Elizabeth. She will also be on our screen as our American Sign Language interpreter from TERP Services in Seattle. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us. And before we begin, I want to give our doctors a few moments to get us started with a brief opening statement from them about teenagers and the pandemic. So Lelach, you want to start?
Sure. So good to be with everyone tonight. Thank you guys for joining us. Cora and I are really excited to share what we can with you this evening. And I guess I would say that I approach this both as a parent and as a pediatrician. So as Don said, I've got 2 of my own teenagers at home. So I'm in there in the trenches with you, trying to navigate this really without a map, because we do not have one to how to parent in a pandemic. And it's hard. And I think that's kind of the baseline, is acknowledging that and acknowledging that there's there's not a rule book, and we're all making this up as we go. And hopefully, with the experience that Cora and I have with seeing lots of different patients and lots of different scenarios, lots of different backgrounds, we can share some of the wisdom that we've gleaned from the folks that we get to speak with every day that may help you in your journey. And we'll help as much as we can, because at the end, we're all just trying to get through this together.
And hi, I'm Dr. Cora Breuner, and as Dr. Don Shifrin said, I work at Seattle Children's Hospital and at the University of Washington. And I've been at this for a number of years taking care of teenagers, but this particular phase of what we're doing in terms of taking care of teenagers through the pandemic has been quite amazing. I've been able to see wonderful experiences that these young kids have put together despite being at home. And I've experienced their frustrations and anguish and anger and disappointment and not being able to graduate and not really sure what they're supposed to do next year, not really knowing what they're supposed to do at the end of the week. I'm a high school football doctor. We're not sure if we're going to have a high school football team this year. There's just so many I don't knows with what we're facing as pediatricians, as parents, as colleagues, through any number of ways. So I'm so excited to be on this panel today. It's going to be really fun answering your questions and coming to grips with what we can do and helping navigate this way.
Well, thank you both very much. And let's get right into our questions and concerns. We've had a lot of parents that have given us some wonderful questions and, shall we say, interesting amounts of concern about how their teens' physical and emotional health is doing during this pandemic time. And there's a few questions, but let's start with, is there any guidance about what is considered the right amount of information to transmit to teenagers? And what is the best way that you would suggest us to accomplish that?
Well, these are questions, these are really important, and it kind of runs across all of us. How much are we supposed to access the news, and how much are we supposed to just turn it off and allow ourselves some break time to reinforce what we know we can do to rest and replenish so that we can face the next day. And I've been in clinic all day today, just answering the same questions through my patients and their families, which is how much should our children be accessing the news, and how much should we enforce turning it off? And I think that it does gauge a little bit to your child and your ability as a parent to cope with it yourself. I feel that being obsessed with what's happening every day is probably not healthy, because it means there's no chance to do anything else with this beautiful developing adolescent brain except worry about this pandemic. So I feel that this is a case where the parents have to use their judgment, not only for their child, but also for themselves. Because if the child is watching the parent looking at the news and constantly trying to keep up, then that's modeling for the child that maybe they should be doing that too. So I think it's extremely important to do a check yourself as a parent to determine whether or not maybe you're being too observant, and take a break from all of this. And just take a walk or get out of the house and to replenish our minds and our bodies.
Lelach, speaking of what I call the infodemic and doom surfing and what that produces in all of us, including our teenagers, what are some of the general signs of distress that parents can notice, especially anxiety? And are there any signs of distress that would prompt parents to seek outside help?
Great questions. So everyone, you'll each know your teen best in terms of what is their normal and what is alarming, what is unusual. And I think distress manifests differently in different kids. Sometimes for younger teens, anxiety, as opposed to showing up as I'm really worried about things, can show up as I'm really agitated. And so if things are off, trust your gut that things are off, even if your child isn't outright telling you, hey, I'm really worried about this pandemic, or I'm really distressed that I can't see my friends. If there's explosions or anger or retreat, things that are not typical for your kid, that's something to pay attention to. And I think when we're talking about teens, it's certainly always worth engaging them in a conversation about that. And we all know, and they all know that we know that this isn't normal. And so being able to put that on the table, and some will be more receptive than others, but being able to have that frank conversation of, this isn't like you, and I'm concerned about it. What do you think's behind this? And I really, really would encourage people to call their pediatrician if they have any doubts, any questions. We are all there. Sometimes we're not there in exactly the ways that you might be accustomed to seeing us. You might see us on video and you might talk with us on the phone as opposed to in person, but your physician community is there and eager to help you and can do so with social distancing. And there are counselors available who are seeing people with social distancing. So even though these are unusual times, the resources that you may have been accustomed to turning to in the past are all there at the ready. And I would encourage people to reach out if they have any questions.
Dr. Cora, any comment about any specific behavioral issues, physical violence, certainly raw, unfiltered language that would prompt parents to take a more calming approach to this in terms of discussions?
That's a great question, Don. And I, as I've reflected a lot on this panel and this webinar, we actually have noticed with this time that kids and parents are spending a whole lot more time together than they ever did before. Before this, kids would be at school and they do a huge eye roll when they came home and just go into their room and slam the door, and parents would be like, okay, I guess that's just my kid. But now, I mean, their parents and the kids are together all day long, which honestly I think is a good thing, because I think parents are doing a lot more observing of their kids' behavior than before this. So while I call it that helicopter thing, which is not what I'm saying is good necessarily, but I do think that parents are really getting to know their kids a whole lot better right now, and vice versa. And so I think our parents are very, very good at picking up something that's not quite the same as it was before. So for example, if the child is sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, and I know we're going to spend some time, hopefully a lot of time on sleep, because that's been hugely disrupted during this. But I think that a parent is going to start noticing these things about sleep, about not being able to sit still, being fidgety, unable to concentrate, worrying about things over and over and over again, having a really hard time falling asleep or waking up too early. There's just a whole lot of behaviors that go along with anxiety and as Lelach said, also being much more irritable than they were before. Whereas we might have said, oh, that's just a normal teenage behavior. It is not a normal teenage behavior to be angry all the time. So I think it's important for us to really listen to our parents. And as Lelach also said, we are totally available. All of us, pediatricians and primary care providers, are available to help out our communities, whether it's virtually by Zoom or telehealth visits by phone or in person. I think there's kind of a myth that everything's closed up and we're not able to do our job as healthcare providers, and that's not true. We're there to help the families navigate what's going on with their child's mental health.
I think that your comment about routines and healthy, shall we say, habits, and we had a couple questions about parents asking, how can I gently, and I'd love the word gently in the question, remind my teen about choices like healthy eating and also not keeping vampire hours? What's a reasonable routine if I have a teenager that's 13 versus a teenager that's 17 or 18? Lelach, you would be obviously the best person to answer this, having a 13 and 16-year-old.
Yeah, I can tell you what's going on in my house. So my 16-year-old sort of has vampire hours, but has really done a great job of justifying to me that he doesn't have an hour commute on public transport to high school anymore. And, you know, he can eat breakfast during his first class because he's at home. And so we've done the math together, and he's meeting his hours of sleep, and it's shifted, but he's doing it. At which point I sort of said, okay, fine. You'll go to sleep a couple hours after me, and that'll be fine because you're getting enough sleep and you're successfully waking up every morning and you're showing up in class. So the proof's kind of in the pudding. I have a younger teen who is not always successfully getting up in the morning and going into class. And so the rules are a little bit different there. And thankfully, he gets it. He gets that he needs that sleep and often is in bed with the door shut before I've even had a chance to say goodnight to him. So I think it really does vary based on the kid. And we all know this, different humans need different amount of rest. I always tell teenagers in the office, you know, the textbook says you need at least 9 hours of sleep. Your body has not read the textbook, so you may be a little bit more, a little bit less. But again, I think it's a great place to work with them on natural consequences, and assuming that they are able to function well and are getting the sleep that they need so that they're productive and functioning through their day, great. And if not, then it's time to really sit down and have a conversation. And that's, again, the beauty of being around our teenagers all the time right now, is there's plenty of opportunities for those conversations.
Well, Dr. Breuner, as an adolescent specialist, can you talk about the impact of poor sleep on emotional responses, educational availability, and, shall we say, decision-making in adolescence?
Yes, and I think there's been so much research on this. A lot of it's been done by my colleagues at Seattle Children's, Dr. Maida Chen, on sleep, and especially in the pre-adolescent, adolescent, young adult brain, that there has been a myth that children don't need as much sleep as we think they do. And in fact, it's the same thing with adults. All of us need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. And it really should happen at night. So, I mean, the thing that we get a lot of pushback from our kids that, what difference does it make? You know, there's no school anyway, which is, that's not true. There is school anyway. And the kid needs to understand that the brain needs to kind of rejuvenate and replenish and recharge, if you will, so that it's ready for the next day. So routine is extremely, extremely important so that our kids can learn. I know that it feels like there is in school, but there is. And so they should be getting ready to get to bed at the same time. Obviously, 2 hours later is, I totally agree with Lelach. Times are a little bit different, but no later than that. I mean, no later than what they would have done, except 2 hours from the school year. And the same thing with waking up. I had a patient today that was getting up at noon to, which is the half the day is gone. And so of light, right? So I think it's important to recognize that routines need to continue. Of course, there needs to be a weekend. So we need to try as we can to have a Monday through a Friday and then a Saturday and a Sunday. So
well,
that
I think
go ahead.
Let me just interrupt a bit and say, obviously one size does not fit all, but we
No.
have to figure out what size fits your family. And we will get back to keeping vampire hours when we discuss a few questions, a lot of questions on screen time later. But right now I want to bring up one thing, and I think we'll start with Lelach. One of the things that parents have noticed is youngsters being extremely downbeat and actually depressed as they're coping with the disappointment and loss of pretty much everything: school, interactions with peers, et cetera, et cetera. So can you talk about, we're going to have a guest now with Dr. Breuner. Can you talk about what parents can notice with disappointment and loss, and whether or not there's any signs of depression that they want to exactly notice and talk about with their teens?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think to begin with, really acknowledging that there is real loss and that things are disappointing and that it's not going the way that they expected for the end of their school year, and allowing a space for those emotions to exist and not having them be right or wrong, but just really acknowledging them and being with them, I think is really important. The classic things that we think of with depression, Cora mentioned some of them earlier, but things like changes in sleep, changes in appetite, changes in interest, things that used to engage and really captivate a person just aren't as interesting and aren't as compelling anymore. You know, feeling down about themselves, feeling they've been a disappointment to others, certainly in the extreme, self-harm, are all things that are very, very concerning, and all things that warrant notice and discussion with the teen and with a professional, quite frankly. So all of those things I think are really, really important. And I think, you know, as we think about how to address that and what to do with it, really having the conversation on the other side of, so is there anything that's going on in quarantine that you're excited about? Anything that's different now that you're at home that you're enjoying, that you may want to actually carry back into life if, you know, we're back in school in the fall? Is there anything that you're grateful for? Pet therapy, like Cora's doing right now. I mean, there's so many ways that we can add little sparks of joy and life, and helping our teenagers really recognize those, I think, is the most powerful anecdote that I know of to the really true and significant disappointments that they're dealing with.
Those are great do's. And Cora, can you comment quickly on maybe don'ts when parents see youngsters that are complaining all day, seeming morose and downbeat all day, may not want to come out of their room and just play video games, or may just want to hide out all day and not interact with the family? Are there any don'ts that you would possibly pass on to parents about what not to do when they see that?
Excellent question, Don. And I feel that, again, the old-fashioned way, if you will, was to just let them just work it out and let them come out of their room when they're ready. I mean, obviously everybody needs some personal space and some personal time, but if a parent wants to just tip, knock on the door and say, hey, I noticed you seem kind of sad, and you know, honestly, I'm sad too. There's a lot of things I just want to make sure that I'm checking with you about how you're doing, and honestly, I'm having kind of a hard time too. But the most important thing is that we have open communication between each other, so that you don't get more depressed or you're more sad, and then make decisions that I can help you feel better. And I don't want you to have to feel like you're all alone going through this and have to decide, just not going to talk to anybody about it, because that's not helpful at all.
Well, I think those are great points about validating their feelings and emotions instead of dismissing them. And certainly then working from there to try and bring them into the family fold and say, we're all in this together. I want to continue with the discussion about our teens' need to socially connect with their peers. And can you describe, Lelach, why that's so integral to their development as teens, and what should parents do when, you know, their response right now is they're in isolation lockdown, and why that's sort of a counterintuitive response to the independence of adolescence that they're yearning for?
Yeah. So this is the prime job of adolescence. It is becoming their own independent human being, breaking away from their family that they've now been forced to be with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's a real tough spot for teenagers to be in. It is absolutely antithetical to their developmental work that they're supposed to be doing right now. And being isolated, honestly, is a little bit antithetical to the human condition. Like, we are social creatures. We are supposed to interact with each other. I was walking one of my dogs this afternoon, my own pet therapy, Cora, a golden retriever. We came to an intersection and it saw a golden retriever across the street, and it planted its feet and its tongue was out and its tail was wagging, and it was so excited. It's one of my own. Let me connect with one of my own. And I feel like that's what each of our teenagers perhaps would do if we, you know, gave them the freedom to. They would, you know, be wagging their tails and being so excited to see one of their own. And it's a human, I guess, also in canine way of being. And it's super challenging. It's definitely what I hear from my kids and from my patients. The biggest bummer about being in quarantine is that I can't see my friends. And
Well,
so,
and that's a great point. We are hardwired to be social creatures. That's why tribes were invented in the first place, probably. But,
yeah.
Cora, can you rebound on that and give us any insight into how we can validate the fact that teenagers feel like they're going backwards and not forwards? They're sort of stuck in a time warp.
Well, it's just amazing. I don't know if you guys have been doing a lot of Zoom visits with your extended family. I have. But our patients have been doing a lot of Zoom visits with their classmates. And so I said to a couple of them today, are you connecting with them in a way that's meaningful, or are you just changing your name, and changing your backgrounds during the Zoom class while your teacher's trying to teach you how to do math? And they laugh because they actually know it's not exactly the same as seeing their friends, but they're getting at least the sort of connection through the lens of the screen, which they're very comfortable with, by the way. And so I think they are getting more than we realize. They're getting some of it, not exactly the same as the physical, but they are connecting. And what I've noticed with the schools right now is they're actually getting points for just the kids participating. So just getting points for just having the kid be on the Zoom call at all, which wasn't the way it used to be. It was you're supposed to learn this, but I think they're getting credit for that, which I think is actually a really cool way to make sure that they stay connected with each other and talk to each other in the chat room or whatever. And so I think until everything gets lifted, which it eventually will, I'm a very hopeful person about all of this. I think it's okay that some of our social connection for these kids is occurring through their school, through their online classes, and through their Zoom connections with each other.
Well, let's just magnify that a bit and talk about Zoom connections and Zoomophobia and Zoom fatigue, which brings up a lot of questions that we got. Almost the more questions than anything else was teens' unprecedented access to screen time for their education, as you mentioned, social connection, creating content on their own, TikTok, et cetera, and also for entertainment, and how parents are concerned enough to ask both of you, what's your best advice on a kindler, maybe gentler way to discuss or probably manage or even moderate screen use with kids? And can they create some boundaries and family rules regarding screen use, even though the screen is now youngsters' best friend? It's always been the elephant in the room for teenagers. Now it's even probably the hippopotamus in the room. So Cora, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that I'm going to go on the American Academy of Pediatrics platform here, which is to talk a little bit about the amount of screen time, which is okay. And we were roughly saying 2 to 3 hours, not based on a whole lot of data. And now that we can do this, our phones even can keep track of how much screen time we have. And I myself even, and it squawks at me when it says, you spent more time on the screen today than you did yesterday. So when I'm talking to my patients on their calls or in their appointments with me, I said, how much screen time do you guys have a day average? And they're like, and they just look at their phone and say 8. And so I like on non-educational platforms or what kind of, because obviously some of the time they're on the screen, they're in school. So I think roughly, really honestly, it really shouldn't be more than 4 hours a day. I think that and that's double what the Academy has recommended, but that was pre-pandemic. But I just feel that can't possibly be good to be spending more than 4 hours a day. And so I that's what I'm telling my patients. You really shouldn't be doing more than that. And when they say, but I'm doing Fortnite and that's how I connect with my friends, or I'm TikTok is how I've survived this. Well, I get it, but let's just dial it back a little bit. Okay. Let's just like drop the number down.
Well, I think that you're correct, and I'm going to ping this to Lelach in a second, but I think that you're correct that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations weren't ever intended for pandemics. Okay, so we can throw those out the window at this point. However, in saying that, perhaps parents can negotiate with their teens about maybe no devices during meals, or maybe no devices certainly when they go to bed, because that just creates more vampire sleep cycles. So Lelach, I'm going to swing this to you to talk about perhaps, the negotiation skills that you could have, because I have a lot of teens that will tell me, the only thing that I have to look forward to is using my screens for content, communication, connection, education, entertainment. That's what fulfills me. And my family isn't really giving me opportunities to interact with backyard activities, puzzles, whatever.
Yeah, I think you touched on something there, Don, that's really, really important, which is what those other activities are. So pre-pandemic, I definitely know that the patients that I encountered who had the least difficulty containing their screen use were the kids who were really involved in other things. So the students who went from school to, whether it be play practice or sports practice or whatever, to homework, to whatever was next, the kids who had a lot of activities often would tell me, well, I don't have so much time for social media. Not that they didn't have any time, but they didn't have the same amount of time that some of the other teens did, because they really had other things that were filling their days. And the challenge now is those play practices and sporting practices and everything else don't exist. However, I would argue that the passions that led those students to be involved with those things still are there. And so if we can have the conversation with our teens, okay, so your soccer season is down the tubes, but what do you want to do that is physical? One of my kids is doing some workouts, and so what's motivating you? Well, when I get back to the rock climbing gym, I want to be stronger. Great, like you can't go to the gym right now, but these are the things that the interests that were there before are still real, and how can you help your teen find a way to pursue those? Because the more of those other things you put in, the less there's going to be time for screens. And quite honestly, as a parent, I don't feel quite as badly when my kid has a lot of screen time, when I know that he's gone on 3 bike rides today and has, whatever else, done a Zoom workout. That makes me feel like there's a little bit more balance there. And I think at the end of the day, all of our time restrictions are not because they're, as Cora was saying, some strong science saying X number of hours are harmful, but because we want to have our kids have a lot of different activities with their brains and their bodies, and we're aiming for balance. So
well, balance is the key word here. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that if you look at content and, shall we say, context, every child is different in what they access and how they access and what they access it for. But Cora, can you talk about opportunities now that we do have stay in place for youngsters to or teenagers to improve their life skills, ironing, cooking, cleaning, making beds, things like that, which sometimes go by the board when teenagers rush out of the house and rush back.
Well,
I'm going to interrupt you just a second, Cora, and just say with pride that my children now all know how to scrub toilets.
Beautiful.
Boom.
Yes.
Yes. No, I honestly, I feel like an old-fashioned doctor right now, because I've been in so many homes in the past month, because people are doing their Zoom calls with me. And for example, I saw someone today and I said, there's a guitar hanging behind you. Do you play the guitar? She goes, yep. She pulled it off and she started playing me a super cool Joni Mitchell song, which of course I'm aging myself. But I was like, how do you know Joni Mitchell? Wow. And she's like, oh my God, Big Yellow Taxi. Who knew? And she played it perfectly. And I said, how did you learn? She goes, I went on YouTube, figured it out. Another one of my patients loves rap. So he has this incredible rap song that he wrote about the pandemic. So, I mean, I cannot believe I'm just sitting there listening to him, and it was during a visit for something completely unrelated. So to shout out to all my patients, because I'm running behind in clinic right now, but that's because I've been hearing these songs or looking at them making bagels or looking at their snapping turtles. So it's
Yes, I think that
fun.
the key point is we need to validate and enthusiastically endorse their other options, the screen alternative options, which is great. But I'm going to move ahead now with a few more specific questions. One is in terms of parents concerned about boundaries. And can you explain from a developmental standpoint why teens tend to dismiss or downplay risk to their health, and how parents can either work through this, around this, or even with this in creating boundaries in the household for them? Lelach, you want to start?
So it's all brain development. So that frontal lobe, which is judgment and decision making, is not completely online yet. And it does not fully develop till their mid-20s at the best. If you have someone with ADHD or something else, you're waiting even longer. So those brains are still in formative stages. They are not fully cooked. And so it is very natural, and it's actually what we expect, for them to feel that they are invincible, that they are untouchable. That's why teens do all the crazy things that they do pre-pandemic. And even more so, or I guess not more so, but there's just more stupid decisions to potentially make because we are in a pandemic. And so that is developmentally where they are. And just acknowledging that and knowing that as you approach the conversation. So not the, you're 16, why can't you understand this? It's like, oh, you're 16, that's why you can't understand this. And still treating them like the young adults that they're trying to become, with respect, and knowing that much of their brain is online, so you can have that conversation. So it's that dance of knowing where they're at developmentally, and also giving them the respect for where they'd like to be. Like, Cora, I'm gonna let you
great.
go.
I want to shift to Dr. Breuner now and talk about some specifics. Issues like, I don't need a mask when I go out, or I want to go meet my friend's boyfriend, girlfriend. And there's some words exchanged that probably resemble Mount St. Helens blowing up 40 years ago today. So, and the other thing, of course, is them telling you, well, Jimmy's parents let him meet his girlfriend. And, I don't see why I can't do that too, because I guarantee you we will be 6 feet apart and we'll wear our masks. So I'm going to leave that wonderfully simplistic question to Dr. Breuner.
Thanks. No problem. I mean, honestly, adults are not behaving very well in that regard either. So I don't know if this is just an adolescent brain thing or just having a challenging time following the rules. But the adolescent brain is definitely one where rules are challenged. And that's kind of part, like Lelach was saying, part of the job of a teenager is to question and ask. Thank goodness. But I think during this time, I think it's time to absolutely follow the rules and pay attention to the guidance that is being put. This is a public health crisis. This isn't a because I said so or I don't want to time. This is kind of like the seatbelt time. I mean, before the laws came out about seatbelts, I was like, I don't feel like wearing a seatbelt. I'm just going to the corner. I'll be fine. So not that it's the same, but a little bit that whole thinking, magical thinking that it doesn't pertain to me is in the same vein as seatbelts. Whereas now people wouldn't even think of not wearing a seatbelt. But there was a time where many, many, many people thought that all that data didn't pertain to them. So I think in the world of masks and social distancing right now, it does pertain to you and on your family and your grandparents and your friend's dad who's in a nursing home. And there's just a lot of people who are at risk that could be harmed because of a decision you make, which you later regret. So I think the trust, which is something that we have for our children, we love our children. We have been working with our children and feel very strongly that they're the best in the universe. And then they do something really dumb, which makes us very angry with them. So, and it makes the trust go away. So what I always tell my parents and told my kids when they were growing up is, I trust you. I'm going to let you, I'm not going to hover behind some tree and make sure you have a mask on. But if I find out that you haven't, then you've just destroyed the trust I've had for you for this, and you're going to have to earn it back. So, sorry, but I got.
I think that's very appropriate. I was also getting a question about parents that are single parents, and the youngsters pre-pandemic were going back and forth between households. And this is, again, a fairly significant dilemma because we don't know how safe the other household is in terms of maintaining pandemic social distancing. Is there any advice, Lelach, you would give in that regard, except to say to parents, there's lots of worry there and you can have to be as certain as you can?
Yeah, I think in all of those circumstances, and pandemic is just one more place that we see it, a parent's abilities to co-parent is so, so important. Being able to put the kids' safety and security above whatever animus might exist between the adults, and really trying to communicate as clearly and directly as possible about what's going on. And I have seen all sorts of configurations occur for families in my practice. I've seen some families where one parent is, let's say, a firefighter and feels like it's not safe for the kids to be at that house. And so the kids have solely been with one parent during the pandemic. I've seen other where kids are going back and forth at the same schedule that they did before. Some where things are actually more 50-50 because work schedules and school is different enough so that circumstances are dictating a lot of things. But I think the bottom line is being able to co-parent successfully, which is hard in normal times in some families. There's no substitute for just trying to communicate between those two households.
Well, thank you. One other thing is that parents can always fall back on the King County recommendations now for everyone to wear a mask outdoors if you're in a group, a store, or if you're outdoors with people that aren't in your household. So there's some definitive King County recommendations on the King County Public Health website. We can certainly put a link to that on the webinar when it gets posted later this next week. I want to just, for a quick last number of questions, there was a few questions regarding how to keep teenagers at home all day focused on their educational progress, not process and progress. Cora, you want to grab that one?
Another tough one.
I'm not giving you easy questions.
No, it's fine. I love it. I like Rubik's Cubes, trying to figure this out. Well, I mean, it's hard. It's hard for me. I mean, before this webinar, I'd been sitting doing patient care all day, and I just went out and took a walk with my very rambunctious golden doodle, Mo. So I think it's hard to do. I think a couple things. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, and she has always felt that people are doing the best they can. If you can truly feel like you're doing the best you can, you actually have a better time throughout your day. I'm also a big fan of 3 gratitudes. So if you can start your day with 3 things you're grateful for, your day goes much better. And so the gratitudes, whether it's the beginning of the day or the end of the day, helps you sort of focus your day to make sure that you and your child are getting their schoolwork done. And so some of the schools right now are having them do projects with some Zoom, like required classes during the day. And so that allows the kids some time to go outside and shoot some hoops or play music or chat with their friends, socially distant outside, and then get their schoolwork. I don't think it's a good idea to sit inside all day, every day, and try to get your schoolwork done. I think that's not sustainable, and you would have little to be grateful for if you did that.
Well, I'm gonna now carry it over to our resident expert with teenagers at home, Dr. Rave, talking about, are breaks important and one size doesn't fit all and each child learns at a different pace sort of thing. Can you comment on that with your experience at home?
Yeah, no, you completely said it beautifully there, Don. One size does not fit all, and kids absolutely need breaks. I think depending on what motivated your child in school before, you may have some interesting conversations because it may not be the same thing right now. If you have someone who was a people pleaser, someone who wanted good grades, and now the school system has said, hey, you're gonna get an A, or your work is not gonna impact your grade, it can't go down, then the question is, so what am I doing this for? And I think actually having that conversation, so what are you doing this for? What are you really going to school for? Yeah, forget the grades. What do you really, what are your goals? And being able to engage them in that kind of deeper conversation of what's the real purpose here. And hopefully whatever that answer is from them might actually carry over beyond pandemic. But I think the idea of figuring out what is the motivator for your kid. And it may just be, I want to pass and get this year done. Okay, let's get it done. And then what are your passions? What are the things that are going to provide you with meaning? Because not every kid is going to thrive in this particular education environment. Heck, not every kid thrives in school. That's not every person's spot where they have their happy place. And that's okay too. And there's some minimums, there's some bare minimums that we expect, and helping your child figure out, how do I navigate that? How do I do what I have to do? And why do I do it? And what really makes me tick, I think, is the type of conversation that one would hope to have.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I feel so significantly empathetic towards the high school seniors who are accepted into colleges and don't really have a certainty as to whether the college, I know UW, but other colleges may be starting, may not be starting. We don't know. How can we get our dorms? I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty that I think parents have to really anticipate being very empathetic to, and also, congratulate them on their success and realize that this is a temporary time warp at this point. So I think we're coming almost down to 7:50, which is the end of our quote unquote, or beginning of the end. And I wanted to give both of you an opportunity to finish with the messages that you want to end with for our audience today. There's a lot of questions. One of the questions that we didn't get to that you might incorporate is, when families have children in teenage years and younger and even younger, what are the responsibilities of the teens, or should we give them a lot of responsibilities other than what they're doing right now? Maybe you can cover that in your end statement. And so I think, because Lelach, you started out at the beginning, I'm going to give Dr. Breuner an opportunity to finish with her hopeful message.
Okay, well, I have a couple of things to say. Let me have my dog hop back up here one more time. See if he comes up. Come on. There he is. So use your pets to help you, because they're right there, and it's free. But I also feel very compelled to talk a little bit about substance use and being very careful that our teenagers aren't turning to alcohol, vaping, marijuana, or other illegal substances to get through this time, because that's not a good way to kind of get through. And it feels like a Band-Aid, yay, but it isn't something that's a good idea. So I think, while it doesn't necessarily pertain to all children, I just need to make sure that parents are having this conversation with their children about this. But also, so from a hopeful standpoint, I think that the way this world was going, I think that there have been issues that have come up, the silver lining, if you will, where parents and families are much closer than they used to be, that there's probably less bullying than there used to be. And there's probably more focus on family meals. And there's a lot of joy in being able to see the clouds in the sky and the mountains and the green. That's all so much more obvious since we have less pollution. So I really feel that the positives of this are sometimes hard to fathom, but I think it's important to recognize that we need to look for them. And I also think that my last message is to practice self-forgiveness as parents, so that if you make a mistake and yell at your kid or feel mad at yourself for not being the uber wonderful parent for the day, and you just had a tough day, that forgiveness is really, really important. Self-forgiveness for yourself and for your children and your extended family and community, just because tomorrow's another day, and we get another chance to have another crack at it.
Can you expand a little, because we do have a little extra time, can you expand a little on the gratitude end of this and being positive with our teens and being that good role model to practice gratitude and ask our family to practice with us?
Yes, the gratitude data the research is really strong, and hopefully we can put a link up afterwards on the site about this, but there's significant positives that come from saying something that you're grateful for. And so for me, with my patients, every clinic visit right now, I am saying at the beginning of the visit, we're going to end with gratitude. We're going to talk about 3 things you're grateful for. And what's so amazing, Don and Lelach, is that all of the kids will go, I'm grateful for my family. I'm really grateful for my family. That's the first thing they say. And you can see the mom or dad or other family members, the partners of their parents just go jaw drop, because I'm not sure they would have said that 3 months ago. And then they might say something like my dog or TikTok video. I don't know. That might be the third thing. I don't care. As long as they're grateful, that's the data that shows that they are going to have a good day and be happy with themselves, which is the whole point.
I couldn't agree more. And Lelach, you've got plenty of time here. You've got plenty of time to finish a statement. So I don't want to belie your time. You've got 3-4 minutes. Go for it.
Right. Thanks, Don. So I'll start with a sweet example that touches on the question that you asked about kids of multiple ages, because I also have a 9-year-old in addition to 2 teenagers. And so it can be tough to figure out what to do as a whole family that really engages and interests a 16-year-old and is also appropriate for a 9-year-old. And so aside from some family game nights, which we have pulled off, my kids have decided that they are watching every single Disney movie in chronological order. So they started in the 1930s with Snow White, and they are moving their way forward. Apparently in World War II, there was a whole Disney propaganda arm, which I did not realize, but it's been this sweet thing that they are all doing together. It's great sibling bonding. And going back to our discussion about screens, in addition to time, it's about content and context. And so I can feel really good about the content and the context. And so I would say for families who have that wide age span, looking for something that can engage everyone in a way that they all feel good is tough, but doable. And I really encourage each family to figure out what that magic thing is for them and go with that. In terms of the grand scheme, I think that your comment, Cora, about patience and compassion and forgiveness for ourselves is so, so key. And really for ourselves and for our kids. It is tough for all of us right now. If nothing else, even if you're a person who is great at finding silver linings, and I hope that all of you are, and I definitely think there are some amazing silver linings, it's just stressful and it's different because it's different, it is stressful. But I think finding those silver linings, which is another way of finding the things that you're grateful for, is really important. I had a family that I met with today, and both of the parents are employed in industries that are not phase 1. And they talked about how they're both on unemployment. And the dad thankfully was able to say, hey, I'm never going to get this again until I retire. I will never have this much time again with my kids. And so, yeah, it's rough, but that was his silver lining. And I think being able to see that and notice that allowed him to be more present in the moment with his kids. And that's all we can do. There's so much that is unknown. There's so much that we don't have answers for. And so being able to find the things that ground us in the moment and allow us to be present with the people that we are around, who hopefully are the people that we would most choose to be around if we had to be quarantined. I think that is the real key, is allowing ourselves to really be in those moments.
Well, thank you. And thank you both for your generous participation tonight. I think the reminder to parents that they are, number one, the resilience models for their children, and that resilience is really a key character trait that we want our youngsters to incorporate. And just think of your children 40 years from now, when their children read about this and say, well, what did grandpa and grandma do when you were, in the pandemic, locked at home with them? And hopefully they'll have some positive things to say. Hopefully. I want to thank again our ASL interpreter, Elizabeth. And I'd also like to thank ParentMap for co-hosting tonight. Unfortunately, I don't think Elaine Sulkin could be with us. But last thing, at this point, a little announcement. If you are concerned about anyone in your household that might benefit from counseling, Jewish Family Service has availability to work with children, teens, young adults, and adults, especially older adults. Please check the website jfsseattle.org for more information and contact information. And just as a last point, this webinar will be recorded and archived on the Jewish Family Service YouTube channel soon, just like a vaccine will be soon, but sooner than that, with additional helpful links as well. And again, I want to thank all of the parents for caring about their teens' emotional and physical health and being great parents. And hopefully we'll see you again. Good night, all.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well.